So far we've discussed how to make a contiguous range selection or contiguous selection inside of Sibelius. Now let's talk about how to make a non-contiguous selection of objects. You do that by first making sure that you've escaped out and nothing is highlighted. Next thing you'll do will be to select an object, and then the modifier key that you use is Command on a Mac. So hold down Command, and every other object or note that you select, in this case, will be added to your selection. So this is a non-contiguous selection. Now let's say, for example, that you screw up and you hit over here in the space, and now you've created a different kind of selection and gotten rid of everything you had selected prior. The way you get out of that is by just undoing. So Command Z takes you back to your last state. If we want to get rid of a few of these, we can go Command Z 3 times, and then hold down Command again and continue by adding the selections or the notes that we want added to our selection. Perhaps you're wondering, why would you want to make a non-contiguous selection anyway? Let me show you. So let's say, for example, that we've decided all these notes here want accents on them. So once we've made this non-contiguous selection, then we can go and hit our accent button here on the keypad and add accents to all of these notes that we had selected. We undo that. We can also go back and deselect something so it's not part of our selection, again by holding down Command and then just clicking on the notes that we want to remove from our selection. Let's just say we want the beginning of the bar there and here, and then we're going to add staccato to those notes, for example. We mentioned earlier that you can make a contiguous selection across staves by just holding down the Shift key. If you want to make a non-contiguous selection of staves, you can select the first bar of the stave you want, and then again you hold down Command and add the other staves that you want to add to your selection. Is a feature that allows you to focus on specific staves that you select and hides everything else. So for example, if we want to look at maybe flute and horn and violin 1, we can select those and then come to the Layout tab and Hiding Staves group and focus on staves. Also, you'll see there's a shortcut, Option Command F on a Mac, so I'll choose that. Now you can see what we have here is the flute, horn, and violin. One thing to note is you'll see this dotted line in between the flute and horn stave and the horn and the violin stave. That means that there's additional staves that are hidden in between these staves. So if we undo that and just choose, for example, violin 1, 2, and viola, and then focus on staves, you can see there now is no line in between here, saying that essentially there's no staves between these two and no staves that are hidden between these two. So that's what those dotted lines in the middle are for. One thing that is important to note is that if we make a selection like we have here, let me do it out here. This will be better. And temp. And then we do a focus on staves. And then let's say, for example, we make a contiguous range selection and then delete the material. What you'll notice is that when we undo focus on staves, it's deleted everything, not just on those staves, but everything in between. So when altering, when you have focus on staves enabled, you need to be careful that if you have this dotted line in between two staves, it's going to delete everything on all of the staves between those two selected staves. Once you've made a selection and chosen focus on staves, you can return to that same selection at any time. In other words, focus on staves has essentially a memory associated with it. So if later on you want to go back in and focus on just those staves, you can just use the command again, Command Option F, and it's going to remember the prior focus on staves that you had selected. So focus on staves is a feature that's really helpful, especially in larger scores like orchestral scores, when you need to zone in on specific tracks or staves of music while you're working. Okay, let's talk about the differences between an edit selection and a system selection. So an edit selection, we've already discussed. You can create a one-bar edit selection by just clicking on a blank spot in a bar, and you get a blue edit selection. We talked about the things you can do with that. You can delete it and replace it with a rest. You can pitch it up or down by hitting the up or down arrow. You can raise everything an octave by doing more, so command and up arrow or command and down arrow. So now let's talk about a purple or system selection. This can be made by holding down command as you click, because command does more. So an edit selection is one type of selection. Command and click will turn that into a system selection. Just like with an edit selection, you can also double click to create a purple system selection for everything on a system. So command and double click, and it selects everything in that system. And then also command and triple click will select everything in your score. This is the same thing as actually going command A on a Mac or control A on a Windows machine. Selects everything in your score. When you make a system selection, you're not only selecting the same bar in every stave of music, but you're also selecting everything attached to that bar. So if you notice, as soon as I make a system selection here by holding down command and clicking, you'll see that the name of the piece, the front page, the title, the tempo, all of those things are also selected because they are tied to this system or bar. If you've already created a edit selection and want to turn that into a system selection, you can do that by using the shortcut Shift Option A. And that will turn your blue edit selection into a purple system selection. Essentially, this is the same thing as making an edit selection and then going up to Home and the Select group and clicking on System Passage. So it turns whatever you have selected into a system passage. One additional way to make a system selection is to come up here to the bars button in the Select group under the Home tab. Remember that shortcut from earlier lessons is Option Command A. And so let's say we want to make a selection from bar 5 to bar 12, for example. You'll notice here, if we just hit OK, it's going to make a edit passage selection. But we can also check on this button here, make system selection, to create a system selection from bar 5 to 12. When you make an edit selection, you're selecting only the notes in that bar, or everything attached to that bar. When you make a system selection, you are essentially selecting everything in that system and everything that's associated with the bars in that system. So it's doing more. The most common way that you will use this is when you want to delete a bar out of a score. So let's say, for example, that we no longer want this bar in the score. If we select or make an edit selection here and just hit delete, it will delete that information and replace it with the rest, but it doesn't delete the bar from the score. It's still there. So we would do that with a system selection because it does more. So command, click, and then when we hit delete, you'll notice it deletes the whole bar from the system. So this butts up now against this bar. So we've deleted this whole bar. So that's mainly how you'll use a system selection, is in deleting bars rather than deleting the notes out of a bar. So let me then show you 3 ways to delete a bar inside of Sibelius. First way is to make a system selection on the bar you want deleted and then hit delete. The second way is with a bar selected, come up to the Home tab, Bars Group, and hit Delete. You'll see it brings up this dialog box. Do you want to delete this bar from the score? Yes, I do. And that's again deleted that bar from the score. Let me undo that. The third way, with a bar selected, use the shortcut Command and Delete, because remember, delete is just going to delete all the notes in that bar. Let me just show you that. So delete deletes all of the notes in that bar. Let me undo that. If we go Command and Delete, that will do more. So it will delete that whole bar from the score. No matter which way you choose to delete a bar in Sibelius, it has to be done from a system selection.